Recording this for you from Yerushalayim, Yer HaKodesh, and although I would love to be there with you in person, it is such a source to be able to learn the Ribono Shel Olam's Torah in HaKadosh Baruch Hu's land, in the city, in the place that is Mamish Shalom to the Kodesh HaKadoshim. So I miss being with you in person, but Baruch Hashem, through Torah, we will continue our bond, we'll continue our connection today as well. So today's daf is Tes Zayin, 16 in Meseches Yevamos, and we are picking up on the top line of Tes Zayin Amud Aleph, an incredible Gemara. Tashma, Bimei Rabbi Dov ben Hyrcanus, Hutra Tsaras Habas La'achin. So remember again, there's two things happening over here. Number one, we have a general machlokes, Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel, about halacha regarding tsaras erva. And you have again, Beis Shammai saying that halacha l'maisa tsaras erva is mutter. And when we say mutter, means there's a mitzvah to do yibum. And you have Beis Hillel who's saying that it's mamish aser. In the midst of all this, we also have a machlokes about whether or not Beis Shammai, when they espouse particular halachic ideology, did they follow through on that ideology, or did they just simply espouse it, but in practice really followed Beis Hillel? So that's an ongoing machlokes as well, which we have not yet resolved. So the Gemara says as follows: May Rabbi Dov ben Hyrcanus, in the days of Rabbi Dov ben Hyrcanus, Hutra Tsaras Habas La'achin. There was a case of a Tsaras Habas. There was a case, ultimately again, of this is our paradigmatic case. Reuven is married to two women, Rachel and Leah. Rachel is his brother Shimon's daughter, so Reuven married his niece. Now Reuven passes away, so obviously Shimon can't do Yibum with his own daughter, with Rachel. So the shaila is, what's the implication on Leah, the unrelated co-wife? So remember again, Beis Hillel will say Tsaras Erva is like an Erva, and therefore she's Asura. Beis Shammai says it's mutter. So there's a story how it's happened. There's Rabbi Dov ben Hyrcanus that this case occurred, and ultimately again Rabbi Dov ben Hyrcanus said that halacha l'maisa, you could do yibum with the tsaras erva. Shmamina asu shmamina. So the Gemara says, what do you see from here? You see from here that halacha l'maisa, Beis Shammai did not only espouse ideology, but they mamish acted upon it as well. To which the Gemara says, shmamina, you're right, there seems to be a conclusive proof to the ongoing question, which is Beis Shammai didn't just espouse ideas, but rather halacha l'maisa, they implemented it as well. Shmamina. Good. So we'll say now the Gemara is going to focus on this story of Rabbi Dov ben Hyrcanus. So Gufa, Bimei Rabbi Dov ben Hyrcanus hitiru tsaras habas li'achin. In the days of Rabbi Dov ben Hyrcanus, they allowed a tsaras habas to go ahead and do yibum. So remember again, in our case, Reuven's married, right? Reuven has two wives, Rachel and Leah. Rachel is an erva to one of the brothers. She's a daughter. So in the days of Rabbi Dov ben Hyrcanus, they allowed Leah, the tsaras erva, to do yibum with one of the brothers. So the Gemara says, "V'haya davar kasha lechachamim," and this whole episode was very difficult for the chachamim. Now, why is that? Because mipnei shechacham gadol haya ve'inav kama milabo lebeis hamedrash. Because there's two things happening. Number one, it was Rabbi Dov ben Hyrcanus who permitted this. So firstly, you have a gadol hadar paskening like Beis Shammai. So that was problematic by itself, because the conventional wisdom was that halacha follows Beis Hillel. So number one, you have a gadol hadar paskening like Beis Shammai. That's Aleph. Beis, here's what's interesting. Apparently Rabbi Dov ben Hyrcanus was blind. The lashon over here is, Rashi says first of all, shechacham gadol haya usfurim chachamim shuetira kamu amdu miliro. So first of all, number one, they assumed that what they heard in the name of Rabbi Dov ben Hyrcanus was indeed his psak halacha. So they were bothered by such a adam gadol, such an important person passing like Beis Shammai. That's number one. Number two, he was blind, or at least his sight was impaired. Therefore, he was unable to come to the Beis Medrash. Now, this is incredible. Why is that difficult? Because had Rabbi Dov ben Hyrcanus been able to come to the Beis Medrash, they could have talked it out with him, right? In other words, we could have had it out. We could have discussed this, which is such an incredible idea, which is that what bothered them was the inability to properly discuss this, that there's a difference of opinions. Of course you have differences of opinions, but what was additionally troubling, remember again, our whole tradition, all of Gemara is built on the concept that we have machlokes. Of course you have machlokes, but the goal of machlokes is to be able to discuss it. The goal of machlokes is not to disagree. The goal of machlokes is to be able to discuss the source of disagreement and to figure out how to reconcile. Or if we can't reconcile, at least to understand the other position. So it was difficult for Rabbi Dov ben Hyrcanus passing the way that he did, but the fact that there was unable to be a dialogue, right? The worst thing about machlokes is when you can't have a dialogue with the other party. So they decided, Amar mi yelech v'yodiu. So they said, okay, let's send a delegation. Let's send a delegation, ultimately again, to discuss this with Rabbi Dosa ben Horkinos, which again, such a Musar Haskell. You have a machlokes, you don't understand. How many times does it happen in life where someone says something or you heard that someone says something and you just take it at face value, you just take it for what it is, and you never even bother to be mavarer, to clarify. Did the person say this? Did they really mean this? How much machlokes is created within Am Yisrael? Because we don't take the time to approach people to clarify what they did or did not say. This is true in the base medrash and it's true in our personal relationships as well. So they say, you know what? Let's go to Rabbi Dosa ben Horkinos. Let's go to him. Who's going to go? Amar Lahed, Rabbi Yeshua, Ani Elech, V'acharami. So Rabbi Yeshua says, I'll go. Who else? V'acharami, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah will go as well. V'achar of me, who else will go? Rabbi Akiva. Both say, so listen to this delegation, right? You've got Rabbi Yoshua, Rabbi Akiva, and Rabbi Yeshua, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, and Rabbi Akiva. Mamish, the Gadol Shebigdolim. They come to the house of Rabbi Dosa ben Horkinos, and they're standing outside. So they knock. So the Gemara says, Amdu Pesach Beiso. Nichnasa Shivchaso Amar LaRebbi Chachmei Yisrael Ba'an Etzlecha. So it's so beautiful. So they show up at the doorway, and the Shivcha, the maid, the servant of Rabbi Dosa ben Horkinos says, Rebbe, the wise men of Israel have come to you. Amar La Yikansu. So he said to them, come inside. So now these three great Rabbanim come into the home of Rabbi Dosa ben Horkinos. Amar v'nichnasu tafsu Rabbi Yoshua v'oshivu al mita shalzav. So ultimately, again, the lashon of tafsu is interesting. So literally, tafsu literally means grab, but lamais in this context doesn't mean grab. It means they seated Rabbi Yoshua. So apparently, Rabbi Dosa ben Horkinos, out of the three, really only knew well Rabbi Yoshua. So Rabbi Yoshua comes in, they honored guest. They give him a golden bed, mita shalzav, a golden couch to sit down on. Amrle Rebbe. So Rabbi Yoshua says to Rabbi Dosa ben Horkinos, Rebbe, Amrle Talmidacha Achar V'yeshev. I didn't come alone. Remember again, Rabbi Dosa ben Horkinos can't see. So Rabbi Yoshua says to him, Rebbe, I didn't come alone. Can you tell your other student to sit down as well? Amrlo Mihu, who else came with you? So Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. Ultimately, again, who else came with me? Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. Amar. So Rabbi Dosa ben Horkinos is so happy about his guest. Amar v'yeshlo ben la'Azariah chavirenu. Did Azariah have a son? So it sounds like from the Gemara, again, I don't know if this means that Azariah had difficulty having children, or that perhaps, again, Rabbi Dosa ben Horkinos just wasn't in touch with Azariah for a very long time. In any event, he hears that he had a son. Now remember, there's another piece to this. Remember, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah was a young man when he rose to prominence. He was only 18 years old when he experienced the meteoric rise to greatness. Harei ani ben shivim shana. Remember again, Pesach's coming. This is in the Haggadah, Gemara Maseches Brachas. So it could just very well be Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, even at this point, was a very young man. So halacha l'maisa, it would appear, and if the fact also that Rabbi Dosa didn't hear of him yet seems to indicate that he was still in his youth. So therefore, again, Rabbi Dosa is so happy. Elazar has a son. Azariah has a son. Incredible. Kara alav. He said about Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. Kara alav hamikra azeh nar hayisi gamza kanti v'lo ra'isi tzadik ne'ezov. Is absolutely beautiful. So he says over here, said the pasuk, literally again, I was a youth, and even when I became old, I never saw a tzaddik who was forsaken. So apparently this was the bracha that he had given, the fact that Azariah was blessed with a son. So Rabbi Dosa felt this to be a manifestation of the Ribono Shel Olam's kindness. Nar hayisi gam zakanti v'lo ra'isi tzadik nezov. You know, the Baal Shem Tov HaKadosh has a beautiful interpretation of this pasuk. He says, Nar hayisi. Nar means a young person. A young person is often filled with hope and optimism, dreams, aspirations. But what happens? Gam zakanti. Sometimes I get old. And old is not necessarily a biological statement. Old age, a person can be biologically young, but we'll call it like hashkafically or aspirationally old. I give up. So what's the goal in life? Nar hayisi. I start life so filled with dreams, hopes, aspirations, optimism. Kam zakanti, then I get old. But the goal is velora isi tzadik ne'ezov. I realize that if I constantly strive to be a tzaddik, I constantly strive to be righteous, ultimately again, lo ne'ezov, I'll never be forsaken by Hashem. There's sometimes the best way to hold on to our youthful aspirations and our sense of optimism and hope is through dveikus b'Hashem. When I have a relationship with the Ribono Shel Olam, that gives me hope, optimism. That gives me a drive to be more, to want to do more. It doesn't allow me to become old in the aspirational sense. In any event, so Rabbi Dov says, applying this over here, so Elazar, he was successful when he was young, and Baruch Hashem, he's successful when he's old. Incredible. So the Gemara says, V'zara bakish lachem tavso, v'oshivo amito shel zav. So they seated Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah also on a seat, on a couch of gold. Amrle, Rebbe, Tamidacha Achar v'yeshev. So now again, so Rabbi Yeshua says to Rabbi Dov, Rabbi, there's one more Talmud who's here. Bring in, seat your Talmud. So ultimately, Amrle Mihu. So who's the Talmud who's here? So Akiva ben Yosef. So he's in the Mihu, Rabbi Akiva ben Yosef. Amrle. So Rabbi Dov hears that Rabbi Akiva's in his home. Amrle. Atahu Akiva ben Yosef, sheshimcha holech misof ha'olam v'ad sofo. Are you the Akiva ben Yosef, the Rabbi Akiva, whose name spreads from one end of the world to the other? Shave bini, right? Shave bini, shave. Please, my son. It's actually quite beautiful how the term of endearment that with which Rabbi Dosa speaks to Rabbi Akiva. Shave bini, shave. Sit, my son. Sit. Kimoscha yarubu b'Yisrael. Ultimately, again, there should be a proliferation of tzaddikim, of people just like you in Klal Yisrael. So it's really quite beautiful. So again, you see that Rabbi Dosa knows Rabbi Yeshua already. Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah didn't know Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah existed, but so happy to hear that his friend Azariah was given a son. Na ra'isi gam zakanti v'lo ra'isi tzadik ne'ezov. Again, which is important for us in the story, but also important hashkafically. And Akiva, Rabbi Akiva, apparently you heard about Akiva. Are you the Rabbi Akiva? Are you the Rabbi Akiva? Who everyone knows your name from one end of the world to the other. And such a beautiful bracha. May there be more Rabbi Akivas in Klal Yisrael. And by the way, I'll just point out the incredible juxtaposition between Rabbi Akiva and ultimately, again, the bracha that Rabbi Dosa used to bench Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. Because especially as we just interpreted, according to the Baal Shem Tov, that na ra'isi gam zakanti v'lo ra'isi tzadik ne'ezov is really David HaMelech is a pasuk about not losing, your youthful optimism. Isn't that what successful life is all about? We give up. We started as a nar, and then I become a zokain. But I realize that at the end of the day, if I could just be a tzaddik, if I could just have dveikus b'Hashem, then I could hold on to that youthful optimism. Wasn't that Rabbi Akiva? Wasn't that who Rabbi Akiva was at the end of the day? Wasn't the greatness of Rabbi Akiva, zechusa yagin aleinu, the ability to hold on to hope and optimism, the ability to see good even in the midst of churban? So it's really amazing how these Rabbanim are coming in one after the other, and how even the pasuk that Rabbi Dosa said about Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah is almost like an incredible introduction of Rabbi Akiva himself. And anyway, I'll also just say, think about all the people in this house. Right? Can you imagine if in your dining room you have Rabbi Dosa, Rabbi Yoshua, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, Rabbi Akiva? It's incredible. And it's going to happen again. Mashiach comes and it's going to be Tchias HaMesim. We're going to walk into the base medrash. We're going to see all of these great Rabbeim, all these great Rabbanim, all these great Tanam and Amram. They're all going to be there. Gives us another something to daven for, because who could imagine the Kedusha that's going to be in the world when all of these neshamas come back? In any event, so the Gemara goes on. So they began to go ahead and pepper Rabbi Yeshua with questions about halachas, general questions. Until they came to the case of Tsaras Habas. Amar Lohen, Machlokes Hashem B'Sil. So they said, Rabbi, So Rabbi Dosa, what's that halacha with Tzaras Habas? Oh, Tzaras Habas, that's a machlokes, Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai Beis Hillel. The halacha kedivrei mi. So they asked, Rabbi Dosa, who does the halacha follow? Amar lahem halacha kabeis Hillel. They said, so Rabbi Dosa, Rabbi Dosa says the halacha follows Beis Hillel. So remember again, the whole reason they came to Rabbi Dosa was because they heard that Rabbi Dosa paskind that Tzaras Habas is mutter, meaning mutter and yibum, like Beis Shammai. So they now come to him, they're talking, and by the way, what's the halacha with Tzaras Habas? Machlokes Hashem Beis Hillel, how do we paskin? Like Beis Hillel. Amr lei. So they said Rabbi Dosa, v'alo mishmech amr halacha Beis Shammai. They said Rabbi Dosa, but in your name we heard that the halacha follows Beis Shammai. Amr lahem, Dosa shamatem or Ben Hirkinis shamatem? Tell me, whose name did you hear it in? Did you hear it in the name of Rabbi Dosa, of Dosa? Or did you hear it in the name of Ben Hirkinis? Ben Hirkinis, who did you hear it? Who did you hear it in the name of? Amrulei, Chaye, Rebbe, Stam Shamanu. They said, Rebbe, you know what? The truth is, you're saying good. We just heard it in the name of Ben Hirkinis. That's all. We didn't hear it in the name of Rabbi Dosa. We heard it in the name of Ben Hirkinis. So we assumed that who's Ben Hirkinis? Ben Hirkinis is Rabbi Dosa Ben Hirkinis. So I said, this is incredible. Amr lahem, Ach katan yeshli b'char satan hu v'yonasan shmo. Wow. So Rabbi Dosa says, you know, I have a little brother, Ach katan, and he's a b'char satan. He's a son of a Satan, right? The son of a Satan. He, not only is the son of the Satan, he is the Bechar, right? Bechar is Chashivas. He is the Farada, son of the Satan, right? He is the Bechar of the Satan. Now his name is Yonasan. Now what's the chap with Yonasan? V'hu mitamidei Shammai. And he is one of the most kanosha, he's one of the most zealot, right? One of the zealotrous, good. One of the biggest zealots of Shammai. If you look at Rashi says over here, Bechar Satanu, Charif va'omed al shmua va'osa ma'aseh ve'eno shamush v'salasos kirabim. The reason why Rabbi Dosa calls his brother the son of a Satan, the Bechar of the Satan, is because it's one thing to go ahead and be charif, to be sharp in your shitos, and it's one thing, of course, to have your halachic opinions. The problem was he never backed down, even when faced with rabbin, even when faced with a majority that held a different way. So I must say, it's an interesting idea, which is, so first of all, Rabbi Dosa was saying, by the way, the Ben Hirkinis that you heard paskin like Beis Shammai wasn't me. It's not me. It ultimately was my brother Yona's son Ben Hirkinis. You heard in the name of Ben Hirkinis, you thought it was Rabbi Dosa Ben Hirkinis. No, it was Yona's son Ben Hirkinis. So first of all, so many incredible yisodos from this particular story. Number one, you see the need to clarify things that you hear and don't just believe when someone tells you that someone said something, especially if it's something upsetting. Here, all of these Rabbanim just assumed that Lamaisa it was Rabbi Dosa Ben Hirkinis. So Baruch Hashem, they had the koach, they had the courage to clarify, and it turns out they were wrong. It wasn't Rabbi Dosa. Rabbi Dosa passes like Beis Hillel. It was Yonasan, the son of the Satan, the Bechor of the Satan, who paskins like Beis Shammai. That's number one. Number two, I will say, is that this idea with Yonasan. In life, it's good to have your shitos, right? It's good to have your hashkafas, and it's good to have your ideas, and it's good to have your principles. But it's also good to know when to stand your ground and when to back down. You see, the problem with Yonasan is that he was a very principled man, held like Beis Shammai, but the rabbin didn't. And in halacha, there's a mechanism. Achei rabbim lahatos. You follow the majority. That's the way it works. The halacha was followed like Beis Hillel, but yet he wouldn't yield. That's not principled. That's arrogant. And this is an incredible yisod in life, because often we get into these situations where I believe one way, but it's clear that I'm a minority opinion. So sometimes people just, now again, are there times when you're the minority opinion that you have to go ahead and stand your ground? Sure, Klal Yisrael is a minority in the world. We still have to stand our ground. But Lamais, I'm talking about an interpersonal conflict, in communal conflict, right? In halachic conflict. So sometimes you have to know when to yield. Sometimes you have to know, because at a certain point in time, people stand on principles, and there's kind of like a fine line between standing on principles and being the son of the Satan. Right? And that's an incredible yisod, to know when to stand your ground, but also when to yield. So the Gemara goes weiter. So Rabbi Dosa tells his guests, by the way, and by the way, whatever you do, don't engage my brother Yonasan in a discussion about halacha. Don't engage. But say again, I know we're still about just a second, because what's just like rattling around in my mind is how a whole machlokis in Klal Yisrael was avoided because people sat down and spoke. I know I said this already, but it's just so dramatic to me. So much machlokes avoided because people decided to have a conversation. How much strife in marriage would be avoided if a husband and wife just sat down? How much strife in relationship between parents and children would be avoided if you just spoke it out? It's difficult to talk things out. But Lamaisa, how much would be accomplished if we just sat down and spoke? And I'm sorry, there's one more thing. I know we have to go on, but there's one, it's a very exciting Gemara. There's one more thing, which is, notice how they engaged Rabbi Dosa ben Hyrcanus, right? They didn't come in guns blazing, saying, how do you paskin like Beis Shammai, you paskin like Beis Hillel, Tzara Sabas is on. What do? They have a conversation, Shalom Aleichem. They pepper him with a whole bunch of questions. They only come to Tzara Sabas at the end of the conversation. An incredible yisod also in conflict resolution. That when you know that you have to have a difficult conversation with someone, or a potentially difficult conversation with someone, there's a way to lay the ground, right? You don't come in guns blazing, right? But rather you set the table, you ease into it, you establish a camaraderie, you establish a friendship, you establish that I'm here as a friend, not as a foe. Because if you jump right into it, can you imagine they come in, Rabbi Dosa, we heard that you paskin that Tzara Sabas is mutter. Again, it could be that Rabbi Dosa and Hyrcanus would have had the same reaction, but it's also possible he wouldn't have. But by laying the right groundwork for a difficult conversation, by setting the table in the right way, you mamish amplify your chances of success. In any event, so Rabbi Dosa ben Hyrcanus says, but let's finish. Rabbi Dosa ben Hyrcanus says that Allah, whatever you do, don't engage my brother. Don't engage my brother because he's going to tear you apart. First wide line. He has 300 proofs. 300 proofs about Tzaras Habas that it's mutter. So whatever you do, don't engage him. Avameir ani alai shamayim va'aretz shamadu chazu yashav chagai hanavi v'mershlosha dvarim. But listen to this. Rabbi Dov ben Hyrcanus says, but my brother Yonasan is very smart. He's got 300 rayas, 300 proofs as to why Tzaras Habas is mutter, as to why the halacha follows Beis Shammai. But I want to tell you, Avameid ani alai shamayim va'aretz, but I swear by heaven and earth, Shalmadu chazu, that on this day, apparently there was a grinding stone that was there. So Chagai, the prophet, sat on this grinding stone, va'amar shlosha dvarim, and he said the following 3 halachas. Tzaras Habas Asura. Number 1, Tzaras Habas is Asur. That's the first thing he said. So obviously Chagai is before Beis Hillel. But even before Beis Hillel, he said the co-wife of an erva is Asur. That's number 1. Ammon o Moav Ma'asrin Meiser Ani B'Shvius. The lands of Ammon and Moav. The Rebbe said lands of Ammon and Moav were originally part of Eretz Yisrael under the conquest of Yoshua, but as we'll see when they came back from Babel, they did not reconquer them. Because of that, those lands do not have Kiddushas Eretz Yisrael. Because they don't have Kiddushas Eretz Yisrael in a Shemitah year, which we are zocha to be in now, in a Shemitah year, ultimately, again, you're obligated to tithe those lands, and they are obligated to go ahead and give Meiser Ani. So it's interesting. In other words, they don't have Kiddushas Shvius, but they are part of Eretz Yisrael. So therefore, again, during the Shemitah year, they are obligated to go ahead and dispense tithes to the poor. Again, we'll discuss this in just a moment. If you look at Rashi, Rashi says over here, Ammon and Moav, Yisraelim hadarim ba'eretz Moav, Ammon Moav, shekibesh Moshe misichom niskat shebegdushas Eretz Yisrael. When Moshe Rabbeinu came into Eretz Yisrael, he went ahead and he conquered these lands. And what happened? Va'achshav b'ayisheni batla kiddushasa. But now, during the times of the second Beis Hamikdash, again, we'll discuss this in greater depth in just a moment, they no longer have their Kiddushas Eretz Yisrael, but the rabbis instituted V'tiknu lahen meiser rishon, meiser ani b'shvius, kid mefarish lekamon. But Chazal instituted that during the Shemitah year, these lands have to go ahead and separate out meiser rishon and meiser ani. And they did this for the benefit of the poor, that since during Shemitah, Rashi says over here, Mipnei parnosas anim sheberetz Yisrael, shelahem malocha b'shvius lefi shebatel leket shicho peah, v'olicham sham v'notlim leket shicho peah meiser. This is so beautiful. Chazal instituted that the lands of Ammon and Moab should give meiser during the Shemitah year. Why? Because during the Shemitah year, interestingly enough, as much as everything is hefker. But because everything is hefker, everyone has access to it. And because of that, at the end of the day, there's no leket, there's no shicha, there's no peah, there are none of the other tithes. Chazal instituted the lands of Ammon and Moab should tithe, should give ma'aser ani, leave leket, shicha, and peah as well. This way the poor have a source of sustenance for them, only for them, during the Shemitah year. Furthermore, what else did he institute? Umekabim gerim min hakarduyin umin hartarmudim. And ultimately, we accept converts from the Karduyin and from the Talmudim. Now we're going to discuss this. Ultimately, again, there was a question about whether or not these people were non-Jewish or whether they were mamzerim. We'll get to that in just a moment. So the point over here is that Rabbi Dov ben Horkin says, guys, my chevra, I just want you to know, this is not my psak halacha that Saras Habas is asura like Beis Hillel. Chagai, I swear to you, Chagai said this already. So we'll say, so good. So now the Rabbanim are happy, they left, they cleared up the misconception. Rabbi Dov ben Horkinis is in line with normative halachic approach that halacha follows Beis Hillel, that Saras Habas, the co-wife of an erva, does not do yibum. She has the status of the erva herself. Incredible. Supposed to say, now watch this. Tana, nichnesu pesach echad, yatsa b'shlosha pesachim. When they came into Rabbi Dov ben Horkinis' house, they came in one entrance. When they left out of 3 different exits. The idea was they did not want to run into Yonah's son. Paga bob Rabbi Akiva. So Rabbi Yeshua was saved, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah was saved, but apparently Rabbi Akiva runs into Yonah's son. Akshile v'okmei. So he asked them questions, and he answered, Amar lo, so we'll say, so ultimately again, apparently Rabbi Akiva wasn't able to answer the questions, but Yonah's son answered the questions. Amar lo atu Akiva sheshimcha holich misofa olam ad sofo. So Yonah's son apparently was not very impressed with Rabbi Akiva. Are you the Akiva whose reputation has spread throughout the entire world? So Amar lo, I'm sorry. V'asa ashrecha shezachisa l'shem v'adayin lo hagata l'roi bakar. It's so Yonah's son says to Rabbi Akiva, it's very nice that you have such a reputation, but I just want to tell you, in my eyes, you have not even reached the level of a cattle herder, right? A cattle shepherd. Amarlo Rabbi Akiva says, you know what, you're right. The truth is, I'm not even a sheep herder. Forget about a cattle herder. I guess being a cattle herder is a little bit more of a chashiv profession. Rabbi Akiva says, I'm not even a shepherd. So the sharp exchange between Yonah's son and Rabbi Akiva, but yet Rabbi Akiva, in his ultimate humility, goes ahead and says, you know what, you're right, but you're wrong. I'm not even a cattle herder. I'm just a simple shepherd. And I will say, by the way, Rabbi Akiva's response comes with such profundity, because at the end, remember, how did Rabbi Akiva start out? Rabbi Akiva did start out as a simple shepherd. And perhaps also Rabbi Akiva was sensitizing us to it. It's so beautiful. How did Rabbi Akiva see himself? He always saw himself as a simple shepherd. See, the greatness of Rabbi Akiva was, as much as his name and his fame did spread from one end of the world to the other, in his own eyes, he was always just a simple shepherd. It's almost reminiscent of David HaMelech as well, right? Mizmor leDavid Hashem roi lo echsa. Hashem is my shepherd. The Malbim says David HaMelech identifies Hashem as the shepherd because he also self-identifies as a shepherd. That Lamaisi, again, sometimes the hallmark of great people is, with all of their greatness and with all of their accomplishment, they're always able to maintain their humility. So Rabbi Akiva, I think most of us would be offended if we had an exchange like this with a Yonah's son. You're not even a cattle herder. You're just, Rabbi Akiva saying, you know what, you're right. But you're right and you're wrong. I'm just a simple man. At the end of the day, let's say, so sometimes in life, the key to success is no matter what our accomplishments are, to maintain our humility no matter how high we rise. So the Gemara goes right. You're supposed to say, so now we're going to talk about the 3 rulings of Chagai. So Chagai says, so first of all, okay, we resolve 2 things. Number one, the halacha follows Beis Hillel. That's number one, that Saras Habas, co-wife of an erva, has the status of an erva. Number 2, we established the fact that Beis Shammai did not only espouse halachic ideology, but they went ahead and held like those halachic positions as well. So now we go on. So remember, Chagai said, Ammon and Moab, Ma'asim Ma'aser Ani B'Shiyas. The lands of Ammon and Moab, they go ahead and they separate out Ma'aser Ani during the Shemitah year. Do Amar Mar, Harbe Krochim Kavshu Ole Mitzrayim V'lo Kavshu Ole Bavel. I will say, when we came into Eretz Yisrael, really, Ammon and Moab was conquered by Moshe Rabbeinu. When we come in with Moshe and then Yoshua, there are many cities that we captured when we came up from Mitzrayim. For Lo Kavsha Ole Bavel. But a lot of those cities were not recaptured when we came back with Ezra to rebuild the second Beis HaMikdash. Ukidusha Rishona Kidsha L'Shaita Velo Kidsha Li'asid Lavo. And Rabbi say the initial sanctity under Yoshua, and Moshe and Yoshua, was only a sanctity for that time. But once the Beis HaMikdash was destroyed and we were exiled, that sanctity left, and only that which was re-sanctified under Yoshua ultimately again regains sanctity. So the lands of Ammon and Moab, which were not re-sanctified under Ezra, under Ezra, by what we call Ole Babel, did not have sanctity. Therefore, again, v'henichum kadesh yismuchu aleim aniyim b'shvius. So I'll say it's interesting. According to the Gemara, it almost sounds like that Chazal went ahead and made a conscious decision to go ahead and not re-sanctify those lands in order to allow them to separate us. So they have some level of Kedusha Eretz Yisrael, rabbinic Kedusha. So therefore, again, that's enough to go ahead and tell the farmers there, tithe, right? Separate Meiser Ani, but it's not subject to Shemitah. Therefore, the Aniyim have a place where they could still collect tithes during the Shemitah year. Incredible. Umekabim gerim min hakarduyim v'hatarmudim. And we accept gerim from karmudim and karduyim and tarmudim. Now, who are these people? Ini, v'atani Rabbi Cheskel, we don't go ahead and separate, accept Gerim from Karduyim. Karduyim is the name of a people. Amravashi, Kartuyim Itmar. No. You're getting confused between Karduyim and Kartumim. Kida Amri Inshi, Kartuyim Psulim. Kartuyim are psulim, both say Kartuyim are mamzerim. We'll discuss why in just a moment. Vika de Amri, both say others have a different version of this exchange. Tani Rami Cheskel in Mekabim Gerim in our Kartuyim. Ultimately, we don't accept gerim from the Kartuyim. My love, Hainu Kartuyim, Hainu Karduyim. Are the Kartumim and the Karduyim the same people? Amravashi lo, Kartuye lochod, the Karduye lochod. They're two different groups. Kida Amri Inshi, Kartuye Psili. So Kartuye are pasul, Karduyim are moter. And I will say, when we say this, that means Kartuyim are mamzerim, and therefore, again, they can't intermarry into the regular pool of Jewish people, versus Kardumim who are Goyim. They're Gentiles. And therefore, again, if they want to convert, they have no problem converting. We'll discuss why the Mamzeros issue comes up. Rabbi Yochanan v'Sabi Yudami Tarbayu, Ein mekablan gerim min tarmudim. Is another version that we don't write Rabbi Yochanan, and Rabbi Yochanan says that halacha lamaisa, Rabbi Yochanan Savi hold that we don't accept gerim from Talmudim. Umiyamar Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan really say this. Vatanan we learned kolak samim haba min arekem tahorim. Ultimately, I will say any ksamim. I will say ksamim are stains of blood. So in other words, the blood. Rashi says shnimtzu bebegad haba merekem. If there's a blood stain on an article of clothing that comes from Rekem, it's tahar. Now ultimately, again, why is it tahar? Because we assume that the residents of Rekem are not Jewish, and ultimately, again, the dam, the ksamim, the blood of, let's say, damnida, of non-Jews does not convey tumah in any way. So the Gemara says, Rabbi Huda metame. Rabbi Huda ultimately says that it's tameh. Mipnei shem gerim. Ultimately, again, because they are Jewish, Rashi says, and therefore, again, the blood does have ritual purity. V'toim mibein ha'ovdei kochavim. What was the problem? So the people of Rekem ultimately are Jewish. So what was the problem? They were living amongst non-Jews, and as a result, they kind of lost their way. Rashi says, Shemiru datam, v'gazru al kismim, sha'afa pi shechatu shemir Yisraelim heim. This is such a beautiful Rashi, beautiful and sad. Apparently, the Jews of Rekem were surrounded by Gentile neighbors. As a result, many of them just gave up their Yiddishkeit or just became fuzzy on some of the details of their Yiddishkeit. But nevertheless, the halacha is, once a Jew, always a Jew. Rashi says over here, Sha'afa pi shechatu shemiru. Even though they sinned, and even though they may have given up certain aspects of faith, Yisraelim heim. Let's say what an important thing to remember. Yisrael, afal pi shechati Yisrael. A Jew, even if he sins, is still a Yisrael. It applies to Am Yisrael, it certainly applies to us. Sometimes we make mistakes, and we think as a result of our mistakes, we've given up our entire spiritual standing. I've abdicated my spiritual standing, and it's not true. even though I sin, even though I make mistakes, Yisrael, who I still have my Kedushas Yisrael. In any event, the point over here is that the Jews, the people who lived in Rakem, they were Jews. They were Jews. They unfortunately just were assimilated Jews and perhaps forgot much of the halacha. Va'avinan ba, v'tomim beina ovdei kochavim. So the Gemara Storem Va'avinan ba, and we asked about this Amud Beis. Kapasik v'tani. So Rabbi say, but we learned elsewhere that it's tar. So how do you understand this? How do you reconcile this? So the Gemara says, Kapasik v'tani. So the Gemara says, Mibena ovdei kochavam fa'afilu min tarmud. Ultimately, again, it means that if you have ksamim that come, ultimately, again, from Ovdei Kochavim, as the Gemara said before, if you have stains of blood that come from Ovdei Kochavim, that is tahar, and ultimately, again, vafilu min Talmud, and even from Talmud. So apparently, the Gemara is saying that the people of Talmud have the status of non-Jews. Vam Rabbi Yochanan, zos someres mekablim gerim miTalmud. Ultimately, again, that we do accept gerim, we do accept converts from Talmud. V'chitema zos velo. So maybe you'll say that halacha l'maisa, maybe it means no, that we don't accept gerim from Talmud. So the Gemara says, Sfira, so the Gemara says, V'zos v'lo sfira le'i, v'am Rabbi Yochanan, halacha kistam mishnah. But we learned that Rabbi Yochanan says, halacha follows a stam mishnah, which would seem to be that we do go ahead and halacha l'maisa accept gerim from Talmud, to which the Gemara says, you're right. Amorai ninu, valibid Rabbi Yochanan. Ultimately, again, it's a machlokes amoraim in accordance with Rabbi Yochanan. So Rabbi say, what's interesting about this is as follows. There seems to be a fundamental machlokes. Do we accept gerim from Talmud or not? That's the fundamental question. Now we'll say, what's the machlokes? Mi Talmud, my taimalo. So we'll say, according to the opinion who says that we accept gerim from Talmud, it's very simple, they're not Jews. But according to the opinion who says that we don't accept gerim from Talmud, what's the problem? What happened in Talmud? Rabbi said this is an incredible Gemara. So the Gemara says, "Mitarma my time alo, pligi bar Rabbi Yochanan v'Sabia." So machlokes Rabbi Yochanan and Sabia. What's the machlokes? Chad amar mishum avdei Shlomo. One opinion said the problem with Talmud was the servants of Shlomo. The Chad amar mishum benos Yerushalayim, and one said it was the daughters of Yerushalayim. Now, what does this mean? But say if you take a look at Rashi, avdei Shlomo shenasu benos Yisrael machmas oshran. V'daran sham becheskas ovdei kochavim, v'kasaver ovdei kochavim, ve'ever haba abas Yisrael havlad mamzer. So we're saying, now listen to this. So one opinion says, what's up with the residents of Talmud? These were the rich servants of Shlomo. Shlomo had incredible wealth. So because of that, even his servants became incredibly wealthy. Because they became incredibly wealthy, that wealth granted them access, unfortunately, into the marriage pool of Am Yisrael. So they went ahead and they married Jewish women. So because they married Jewish women, they married Jewish women. Now both say, now interestingly enough, this opinion reflects the idea that an Eved haba bas Yisrael, if an Eved fathers a child with a Jewish woman, that child is a mamzer. Now that's a discussion in halacha, but apparently that's what this particular opinion holds. So the residents of Talmud were the original descendants ultimately of the servants of Shlomo and Jewish women. So non-Jewish servants with Jewish women. And again, Rashi says, so because they assume that the products of this union, again, is a machlokes, that the products of the union, Oved Kochavim or Eved, who fathers a child with a Jewish woman, that offspring ultimately is a mamzer. So because of that, the residents of Talmud were considered to be mamzerim, and therefore we'll say again, allowing them into the general pool is problematic. What's benos Yerushalayim? We'll see over here that this is a tragic idea. They're both tragic ideas, but this is when Yerushalayim was overrun by foreign armies, that there were many Jewish women, unfortunately, again, who were violated. And as a result gave birth to children as a result of these acts of violation. So ultimately, again, Rashi says over here, not only that, but in the aftermath of that, there was intermarriage as well. And apparently, again, the results of these unions went ahead and settled in TALMUD. So according to the opinion who holds that it was a problem that the servants of Shlomo went ahead and fathered children with Jewish women, Kasavra Eved Ovid Kochavim, the Eved Haba Bas Yisrael Havlad Mamzer. That Ovid Kochavim, or an Eved who fathers a child with a Bas Yisrael, the offspring is a Mamzer. I both say we don't pass in that way halacha l'maisa, but apparently this opinion does. What's the story with Benos Yerushalayim? So Pligi bar Rav Yosef Rabbana v'Terav Mishrei Derabba bar Bachana. Both say, listen to this. Chad Amar Tresar Alfei Gavri V'Shisa Alfei Kashtuye. Once said Rabbi said that when the armies overran Yerushalayim, there were 12,000 foot soldiers and 6,000 archers. V'chad Amar Tresar Alfei Gavri. Others say it was just 12,000 soldiers altogether. Umeinaihu Shisa Alfei Kashtuye. And amongst them, there were 6,000 archers. A tragic Gemara. B'shasha nichnasu. Both say first wide line. B'shasha nichnasu Ovdei Kochavim lehecho. When ultimately the Ovdei Kochavim came into the Beis Hamikdash to overrun it. Hakol nifnu al kesef v'zav. Everyone came to take the gold and the silver. The haim. These 12,000 soldiers or 18,000 soldiers, depending on how you calculate, v'heim nifnu al benos Yushalayim. So unfortunately, what happened when Yerushalayim was destroyed? When Yerushalayim was destroyed is the large segment of the invading army went to take the riches, but there were some significant 12,000, 18,000 soldiers who set their eyes on the Jewish women of Yerushalayim. V'heim nifnu al benos Yushalayim shene'amar noshim b'tzion inu b'sulos ba'ari Yehuda. Pasuk says, quoting the pasuk from Eicha, Nashim Tzion, they afflicted the women of Tzion, the Besulos in Arid, in the cities of Yehuda. So I will say an incredible, an overwhelming Gemara. So there were those who were just here for the money to take the gold and silver of Yerushalayim, and others who went out and abused the women of Yerushalayim, the women of Ari Yehuda. Amar Rabbi Yishmael bar Nachmani, Amar Rabbi Yonasan, Pasuk Zeh Sar HaOlam Amru. This pasuk ultimately, again, the Sar HaOlam, Rashi says, who's the Sar HaOlam? Malach. Malach said this pasuk. So the Gemara says, Nar Hayisi V'gam. So I'll just point out to you how, it's very overwhelming to read this pasuk. Nashim B'Tzion Inu B'Suos Ba'ari Yehuda. As I teach you this, as I learn this Gemara with you from Tzion, from Yerushalayim. What days we live in. What days we live in. What happened to Yerushalayim and what happened here and the destruction. Baruch Hashem that we're zocha to live in a time where literally, I don't know if you hear in the background some of the traffic of Yerushalayim. It's absolutely incredible the days in which we are living, the overwhelming days in which we are living, the contrast. How in our daf today we learn about how Yerushalayim was pillaged. Beis Hamikdash was pillaged and plundered. The women of Yerushalayim were pillaged. And yet, Baruch Hashem, zachinu to live in a day, to live in times where we see Yerushalayim being rebuilt, literally rebuilt, in every single moment of every single day. It's incredible. So the Gemara says, now the Gemara just transitions. Amar nar hayisi v'gam zakanti. Who said the pasuk? Nar hayisi gam zakanti. Or who said, we had this before, nar hayisi gam zakanti, I was a lad, I was young, I got old. V'lo ra'isi tzaddik ne'ezav. I never saw a tzaddik who was forsaken. V'zara mevakesh lachem, and his offspring seeking bread. Who said it? If you want to say HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Mika Zikna Kameh, does HaKadosh Baruch Hu get old? When we nari Sigam Zakanti, Vela David Amrei, but it was David who said it. David HaMelech said it. And I both say, now, interestingly enough, only reason the Gemara is saying this is because since we just said the pasuk in Eicha was inspired by a malach, right? It was a malach who saw the incredible destruction and ultimately went ahead and said this. So ultimately, again, we quoted this pasuk in the earlier sugya. We're just curious, who said the pasuk of Nara Yisi? So it couldn't be HaKadosh Baruch Hu, because it's not HaKadosh Baruch Hu to say, I was young and then I became old. It was David. Ela David Amrei, Mi Kashesh Kulehai. Ultimately again, did David HaMelech ultimately again go ahead and get that old? So the Gemara says, Ela Shmamina Sar HaOlam Amru. Rather, you have to say who said it. It was the Sar HaOlam. Now, both say, we're going to see, Rashi says over here, once again, Sar HaOlam is a Malach. So I will say, so it's interesting. So David HaMelech only died at the age of 70. So it's not that David HaMelech could really say, Nari Zigam Zakanti, did he reach Zikna? Did he reach old age? He lived to 70 years old. That's not so old. So therefore the Gemara says, interestingly enough, interestingly enough, that it's the Sar HaOlam. And again, Rashi says here, Sar HaOlam always means a Malach. Sar HaOlam does not mean HaKadosh Baruch Hu, it means a Malach. It means Malach. So I'll say it is interesting that the attribution of this pasuk is not to David HaMelech, but according to the Gemara over here, ultimately it's the Sar HaOlam. Now I'll just point out, the Pasha Pshat in the pasuk is not like this, right? The Pasha Pshat is that it is David HaMelech who said this pasuk. And why did David HaMelech say this pasuk? And it's really an incredible idea. Nara Yisigam Zakanti, because David HaMelech only lived to 70, but Lamaisa, that was his old age. What David HaMelech was saying on a basic level, V'lo Isi Tzadik Ne'ezav. And I want to conclude with this. We'll leave the rest of this Gemara Mir Hashem for tomorrow. But I just want to conclude with this Yisod, because what we said before was a little bit more on a hashkafic level. Nara Isi Gam Zakanti V'lo Isi Tzadik Ne'ezav. I start out life as a nar, as a young man, Gam Zakanti, and then I become old. Old, not a reference to biological age, but old a reference to sometimes I get old. Right? You ever have one of those days where you just feel old? You give up your life, you give up your dreams, your aspirations, your hope. But ultimately, again, V'lo isi tzadik ne'ezav. Become a tzaddik. Have dveikus b'Hashem. And when you have a connection to Hashem, that fuels you with hope, with optimism, with aspirations. Good. Pasha Pshat is David HaMelech had a very difficult life. David HaMelech had an incredibly difficult life. And the truth is, in David HaMelech's experience, the good guys didn't always win. David HaMelech was on the short end of the stick for much of his life. And for no good reason. For no good reason. Other than the fact, of course, the best reason, that it was the plan of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. When David HaMelech says, Nar ha'isi gam zakanti, I didn't live a long life, but I was young, and I got old. And the truth is, every single step of my life journey was difficult. Every single step of my life journey was difficult. But lamaisa, v'lo ra'isi tzadik ne'ezav, v'zar mavakesh lachem. One thing I could tell you is, HaKadosh Baruch Hu takes care of everyone. At the end of the day, the Ribono Shel Olam always comes through. Maybe he doesn't come through when I want it, or how I want it, or in the manner that I desired it, but v'lo ra'isi tzadik ne'ezav. David HaMelech says, I could tell you, as someone who encountered an incredible amount of life adversity and difficulty. Now you can hear the traffic. As someone who encountered an incredible amount of life adversity and difficulty, I could tell you that HaKadosh Baruch Hu always comes through. It may take a while. V'zara mevakesh lachem. HaKadosh Baruch Hu never leaves anyone high and dry. Maybe life doesn't follow the plan you had for yourself. Maybe life doesn't follow the script as you had scripted it. But ultimately, again, v'lo ra'isi tzadik ne'ezav. An incredible lesson is something we all have to take to heart. All right, so we'll stop over here for today. Such a schus to be able to learn with you, Amir. So look forward to finishing the parak tomorrow. Wishing everyone a wonderful day. Yes, shekayach, everyone. Shekayach.